The prettiest house on Zillow is not always the smartest house to buy, especially in St. Petersburg, Florida, where two homes a few blocks apart can have very different ownership costs and resale factors. So before you fall in love with that kitchen backsplash, those nice palm trees in the front yard, and those perfectly edited listing photos, let's talk about what you need to look out for first. I'm gonna walk you through the 5 biggest red flags to look out for if you're buying a home in St. Pete, especially if you're moving here from out of state and trying to compare homes online. By the end of this video, you'll know how to shop for homes more intelligently without overthinking every listing, even if you've never bought in Florida before. If you're new here, I'm Alexi, your St. Pete Clearwater realtor. If you're thinking about relocating here, there's a link below to book a free one-on-one strategy call with me, like many others have already done. And for any French speakers watching, je parle français aussi. Now let's begin. Let's start with flood zones. In St. Pete and really across Pinellas County, flood zones are something you want to understand early. One of the best parts of living here comes from the fact that we are surrounded by water, but it also means that you have to be a little more thoughtful when you're looking at homes. Being in a flood zone does not automatically mean the home is a bad deal. That's one of the biggest misconceptions that I see. Some buyers hear flood zone and immediately run the other way. Other buyers completely ignore it because they fall in love with the house. The kitchen has quartz countertops like they saw on Pinterest, and suddenly we're all pretending flooding doesn't exist. The smart approach is to look at things case by case. So here's what I want to know for each property. What flood zone is it in? Is flood insurance required by your lender? Has the home had any previous flooding or storm damage? And what would the actual flood insurance policy estimate look like? This is where the online search can be misleading. You may see a home that looks like a great deal compared to another home just a few blocks away. But once you factor in flood insurance or other insurance considerations, the monthly cost may be way more expensive than you thought. For example, Distant Heights is a really popular neighborhood known for its high elevation and solid block construction homes, keeping insurance costs lower. And most people automatically assume that there aren't any flood zones there because it's higher up. But actually, if you pull up a flood zone map, which shows high-risk flood zones in blue, you can see that part of the area is in fact in a flood zone. Sometimes the opposite is true. A home is in an area people assume is risky, but because the home is built up on a raised foundation and it's built with all the latest modern construction features, the actual numbers come back more manageable than expected. I've seen quotes in flood zone neighborhoods come back under $1,000 a year for the right home. For example, Venetian Isles is a beautiful waterfront neighborhood just north of downtown St. Pete. And compared to the surrounding area, that neighborhood was developed at a higher elevation at about 5 to 7 feet above sea level, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it does make a difference for insurance. For example, if you were to take 2 identical new construction elevated homes, one was in Venetian Isles, you might pay somewhere around $1,200 a year for your flood policy. And if that same home was just west of Venetian Isles in the adjacent neighborhood of Shore Acres, your flood policy might be closer to $2,000 a year because Shore Acres was only built up about 3 feet above sea level. So the bottom line is you don't need to automatically rule out flood zones, but make sure you do your research on each property you're considering before you make a decision. The second red flag is solar panels. And I'm not saying solar panels themselves are bad. We get a lot of sun in Florida, so solar can make a lot of sense here. The issue is when you're buying a house with solar panels, you need to know exactly what you're inheriting before you get too far into the deal, because solar panels are not always included with the house. Sometimes they're fully paid off and owned outright, which is usually the cleanest scenario. Sometimes though, there's a loan attached to them, or even worse, sometimes they're leased. There could be a purchase power agreement in place where the homeowner doesn't technically own the system, but agrees to buy the power it produces at a lower rate. And sometimes the current owner signed a solar contract that looked amazing during the sales presentation, but looks a lot less amazing when when you read the fine print. It can become a problem because if the panels are not paid off, you may be asked to assume the solar loan, which means you're now taking on a new loan that you never asked for. And if you're financing your home with a mortgage lender, that solar payment can then become part of your debt picture, which may trigger additional review by your mortgage lender and end up impacting how much you can actually borrow. With leased panels, the issue can be even more frustrating. The buyer may have to qualify for and assume the lease, and you may not be able to just remove the panels or cancel the agreement because you don't like the terms. And then there's the payoff amount. I've seen situations where the seller owes way more on the system than the buyer expected, or the payoff is so ridiculously high that it becomes a negotiation problem. Like, I've seen solar payoff amounts over $60,000 for a small 1,300 square foot house, which is crazy. So that's how solar can blow up a deal, not because solar itself is bad, but because the contract behind the solar was not understood early enough. The red flag here is when nobody can clearly explain who owns the panels, what contract is attached to them, and what the buyer is expected to take over. That's the part I'd want sorted out early before you pay for inspections, before you pay for an appraisal, definitely before your days from closing and suddenly learning that there's a solar agreement in place that no one bothered to check. And these are exactly the types of things that I help buyers with when we're out looking at homes and doing our due diligence. So if you're thinking about buying here and you want help looking at the full picture before you fly in or make an offer or get too attached to a house online, there's a link below to book a free one-on-one strategy call with me like many others do every week, or you can also scan that QR code. The third red flag is property taxes. When you look at a listing online, it usually shows you the current property tax bill, but that tax bill belongs to the current owner, so it may be based on what they paid years ago, and it may not reflect what your taxes will look like after you buy. So in Florida, property taxes reset after a sale based on the new assessed value. And if the current owner has had the home for a long time, their tax bill may be much lower than what a new buyer should expect. The better way to do it is to estimate what taxes could look like after purchase and build your monthly budget around a realistic number. You can do that on the Pinellas County Property Appraisers website, which is an overall fantastic resource for home buyers. They have a tax estimation calculator that you can use to plug in the address that you're looking at before you buy, and it'll give you the estimated tax bill for it. Red flag number 4 is the HOA or condo fee. This is especially important in St. Pete and Clearwater because buyers often compare single family homes, townhomes, villas, and condos. And sometimes a condo can look more affordable because the purchase price is lower, but once you factor in the monthly condo fee, the full monthly cost may be higher than expected. On the other hand, sometimes an HOA or condo fee can include things that you would otherwise pay for separately, like exterior maintenance, building insurance, amenities, landscaping, utilities, or other services. So the fee itself is not automatically good or bad. The question is, what does it include? Is it gonna increase over time? And does it fit your lifestyle? Some people love the simplicity of a condo because they don't wanna do a bunch of yard maintenance or exterior maintenance, which honestly can make a lot of sense. Other people would rather have more control and fewer association rules. So if you end up purchasing something in an HOA, just make sure you understand what you're signing for before you buy. The fifth red flag is one of the most important for relocation buyers. The house looks great, but the neighborhood doesn't fit your lifestyle. This happens all the time when people are moving from out of state. They see a beautiful home online, the photos look amazing, the price seems right, the kitchen is updated, the backyard is cute, everything seems perfect, but when you look at the day-to-day lifestyle, it may not be a fit. Maybe the commute is longer than they expected, maybe it's not as walkable as they pictured, maybe the beach access looks close on a map but feels very different in real life because of traffic or parking. And that's why I always tell buyers, You're not just buying the house, you're also buying the daily routine around it. Where do you get your groceries? Where do you go for coffee? How long does it take to get to work or the airport? Are you actually gonna go to the beach every week, or do you just want the comfort of knowing that it's close by? This is where St. Pete gets really interesting because neighborhoods can feel very different from one another. And if you're buying remotely or visiting only once, this is where local guidance really matters. The red flag is not buying in the wrong neighborhood according to what someone else tells you. It's buying in a neighborhood that doesn't fit your actual day-to-day wants and needs. So if you're buying a home in St. Petersburg, those are some of the red flags I'd check first. And remember, these are not always reasons to avoid a home. They're just things you want to understand before you make a decision. And that's really the goal here. Enjoy the Florida lifestyle, but plan the numbers clearly so you can move here with confidence. So if you're thinking about moving to the area, there's a link below to book a free one-on-one strategy call with me. Viewers reach out every week with exactly these kinds of questions, and I'm happy to help you compare homes, neighborhoods, monthly costs, and what actually makes sense for your situation. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.